welcome back. Appreciate all of you hanging out with us in the Outkick studios. That walk-up music can only mean one thing. It is the man, the myth, the legend, Petros Papadakis. We have got a lot to get to with him. But Danny G has gone back into the archives from last year, maybe the twinkling dust sound of the Outkick archives. And we were just laughing about this yesterday on the program, the idea of the bubble and everything else as we were talking about the NBA being a little bit different. This is from all the way back on March the 24th of 2020. And this was me talking about the idea of there being a bubble in the NBA and the NHL. And this was Petros on his weekly hit deriding the very idea of it. Enjoy. My idea, and I want to hear whether you think this is crazy, is you would have to create like a campus-style environment, maybe take over a college campus, put the athletes in dorms like it's training for football or whatever else it is, and then play them inside of you have to quarantine them for 2 weeks. And then you play the games inside of like this bubble, this college campus, which is safe.
What are you talking about?
That's the only way I can imagine. Because here's the thing.
I have no idea what you're saying. It's like you're a child who's drawing something.
No.
You know they're not going to build a super league dorm for you. You know that, right?
I'm just saying they're college campuses. If you wanted to play...
What happens when one of the quarantined officials sneaks an escort in?
Oh, that's one of the
coronavirus.
That would be one of the greatest 30 for 30s ever. It would be everybody trying to smuggle girls in, everybody trying to smuggle all different sorts of stuff into the sport bubble.
Yes, the Clay Travis Sports Complex bubble.
Just saying, the NHL. You have like a quad of 4 teams on one campus that are going to play a best of 4. You have 4 different college campuses, and you have an ice skating rink in the middle. You put 4 teams in there for 2 weeks. One team emerges as the winner or whatever it is of the 4 team, knocks it down to 4 in the NHL. You can do the same thing in the NBA. It's like the pod system. I'm sorry for being a genius, just tossing it out there. 4 different pods.
Yeah, I nominate Sarah Lawrence for one of the campuses. Maybe Mount Holyoke.
Wherever the safest place is, where there's the least amount of virus, boom, you play the sports right there. I'm going to talk about this tomorrow. I'm sorry for being a genius. We bring him back in now. This is, I wasn't perfect. I was talking about the idea of the bubble on a college campus, but I'm glad that Danny G went back and got that. I mean, March 24th was not very long right after everything shut down. I mean, I was already trying to find a way to figure out how to play this thing, and it ended up taking a couple more months. But I got a lot of things wrong. This may be one that I got right.
You were prophetic in nature, like Isaiah, the first prophet of the Old Testament. You were very, very impactful, and I came off sounding like a wanker and a clown. And I appreciate you digging that up. I mean, I'm sure there's some footage out there of me saying that Patrick Mahomes has terrible footwork, which is true. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff out there. But I remember that moment, and I remember thinking in the moment, like, well, they won't even let us eat at a restaurant. How are we going to do, And the truth is, what I should have considered is that if there's a way to make money, people like you will figure out how. People that make money will figure out how to make money if there's a way to make money. I mean, I don't understand Dogecoin or anything, but
yes,
I hear people talking about it, and it just seems like another way for people that make money to figure out how to make more money. And look, I got no issue with that. If it helps other people make money and it helps other people work, then great. One thing that is interesting, looking back to that time, and like you said, it took a couple months to get it together with the NBA, and there's a lot to talk about and unwrap when it comes to that bubble and a lot of the choices the NBA made that we've talked about. But we had Jeff Van Gundy on last week, which doesn't happen often on our platforms for the listeners to know because he's an ESPN ABC person. And generally, unless those people have some kind of personal relationship, they're not allowed to go on non-ESPN property shows. Did you know that?
Oh, the ESPN
you know
has
that.
not. Yeah, ESPN has not allowed anybody that is an ESPN employee to come on my show for 5 years, basically. Like,
right,
I mean,
and
they try to immediately shoot everybody down.
And that's the general rule, though. Like with everybody, like we just don't often get that kind of those guys, even if we're friends or have relationships, because they're just not allowed to do it. But Van Gundy's on a certain level, and he doesn't care. But he came on, and the interesting part of it is that he just said, "Look, let's call it what it is. That bubble was miserable." Like, it was the most miserable thing for everybody involved. That the NBA bubble was an absolute death march. It was a really, really rough thing for the people involved. And the Lakers were the least miserable of the most miserable people because they won it all. And that was his point. He was there. None of us, all we saw was, Rajon Rondo's brother yelling at people and stuff. We didn't really know what it was like all day for everybody. And I don't care how rich you are. I mean, that sucked. But they got it done. They got paid. They got their TV deal basically fulfilled so they could cash those checks. And as long as there's people out there that know how to make money, they will make money through anything. Not that, and there's a whole argument about what should or shouldn't have been done during the pandemic, but you nailed that one right on the head, Clay, and you were very forward-thinking, and that is why, despite your gigantic nipples, you make the big, big money.
We're talking to Petros Papadakis. Speaking of not my gigantic nipples, but the gigantic crowds that were going on into the weekend with everything out there, over 70,000 for a boxing match. The Braves have 40,000 fans present for their series against the Phillies. The golf tournament in Charlotte, Rory McIlroy wins, huge crowds there. Darlington, South Carolina with NASCAR. And obviously the fact that the Texas Rangers continue to have crowds present. I'm looking at the NBA and the NHL playoffs, and this kind of builds off of the bubble question, but it's the next year now. There aren't very many people, I think you could speak to it, that are getting allowed to go into Staples and watch games. And the rules, if you go in there, are not exactly like relaxing, fun. This is not like have a popcorn and have a beer kind of environment. How much of an impact does this have going forward? Let's just use LA as an example. The Lakers may or may not end up in this, whatever this ridiculous play-in round is for the NBA, but they may or may not end up there. But even if they are advancing beyond that and going into the playoffs and everything else, it's possible that they could be on the road. Let's use the Jazz as an example, where Utah, which is not that far away, Salt Lake City, they have a pretty wide open Jazz arena type setting. How much conversation are we going to get about the impact of a home court advantage and a team like Utah or a team like the Dallas Mavericks in the West getting a home court advantage, and a team like the Lakers or the Clippers or the Portland Trailblazers where really there's no advantage at all and they're restricting the amount of fans that can be there? That seems like a fundamental lack of fairness when it comes to home court advantage, which is obviously theoretically what you play the entire season for.
Yeah, you're not the first to mention that. That was Van Gundy's point last week on the show as well, and that will be something that I think a lot more people will look at as the playoffs approach, and I think a lot more people are going to look at how interested people are in the NBA playoffs. Like, if that interest is going to kick up a notch when the actual things start. But I think what you said about some places having full crowds, and what a great celebration that is for everybody there after what everybody's been through. And you see that, and then you see the kind of draconian, it feels not as miserable as the bubble.
Right.
But watching those people in the stands at Staples, they look pretty miserable. I mean, there's 8 seats between, every person.
Yeah.
You got to go to a different area to eat like you're a cow and drink. I mean, they literally treat you like you're part of the audience at American Idol, which is the most dehumanizing thing in the history of the world, I can tell you. And that's not a cool way to treat somebody who is your customer. So it just doesn't. It just I don't know. I see it changing rapidly as the tiers keep changing in California, and I think there's a lot of rich people, despite their political proclivities, that see these full crowds everywhere and are licking their chops and miss that revenue. So I think it'll change, but I think it's a magnifying glass on just how divided we are as people. And you saw it just with the Pac-12 and the SEC and the difference in how we handled college football so long ago now, it seems. I mean, all of those things are glaring kind of reminders that we are really, really divided. And I do think, though, that the amount of money being made in the places that are open is going to eventually just cave the rest of us in.
I think that's right. I think ultimately, looking at all these different sporting events that are going on, everybody's going to end up with roughly the same rules. I'm going to ask you,
but
there
are people, they just aren't. They don't want to quit the lockdown. There are people. They just, they could be, like, I know people that have had COVID that have antibodies that run around and telling people to stay 5 yards away from them.
Right.
And, it's like, okay, like, I mean, I get it, people are weird and everybody's got their interesting little idiosyncrasies and God knows I'm not alone. But I just noticed that around California, that there's a lot of people like me who are vaccinated and want, it's not like I'm licking handrails, but I'm certainly, trying to show my kids that, like, hey, I'm going to go to your baseball game. I'm going to sit in the lawn chair and I'm outside. I'm not going to wear a mask. Like, we're okay. But there's a lot of people, it just feels like they don't want to go back, or for whatever reason. And I think that's more prevalent here than it is, maybe in a place where you are.
And what's interesting about this, and I don't know if you've talked about this on your show, but this is kind of a crazy stat. California lost population in 2020 for the first time as a state since 1850. And that's a pretty wild statistic to think about, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. I know a lot of people.
That are just fed up. I mean, I think that was...
Yeah, and I know a lot of other people that say, like, hey, when my kid graduates high school, I'm going to do this. And some people do it and regret it. I mean, a lot of people in my neighborhood have moved to places in Texas, and then they say, well, it's cheaper and this and that, but the people are less interesting. Look, I'm from here.
Yeah.
My family's been here since 1912 as Greek immigrants. We've not always enjoyed the politics. It's not always been but this is our home. And to me, I don't know, running to Idaho and trying to act like that's your culture and that's who you are is a bit of a cop-out, too.
By the way, I met one of your high school classmates who also went to SC at a neighborhood party.
Alistair.
Yes.
Alistair, the jazz singer.
Yeah, he used to sing in your dad's restaurant. He's doing they're doing an event here in my town, my little neighborhood of the Nashville area. But he and his wife have moved. I was crazy. Like, I was in this house party gathering, and he came up, and the first thing he says is, I went to high school with Petros. And he was talking about what an incredible
well,
player.
That's your connection in California.
There you go.
You only go as far as I take you in this state, Clay.
He was talking about how good of a high school football player you were and how good of a high school football player your brother was. That was the initial part of our conversation. Then I took a picture with him and sent it to you.
Remember the movie Johnny Be Good?
Oh, yeah.
Remember there was a character in the movie Johnny Be Good called Meat Andropoulos? Like, he was one of the big national recruits?
Yes.
That was based on my brother, Petros Papadakis, who was just the most gigantic, muscular. His traps were so big his head looked like a tent, could not scrape over the top or run sideline to sideline, but if you found him in the A gap or B gap,
you were done.
He'd knock your head. I remember Jason Kendall, the great catcher for the Pittsburgh Pirates all those years?
Yeah.
Well, he was also the quarterback at Torrance High School. Torrance High School is where they shot 90210, She's All That. Every show you've ever seen is shot at Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It's a great old, beautiful L.A. high school. It's supposed to be West Beverly High for all of us for all those years that 90210 was on. And Jason Kendall was their quarterback and catcher and one of the great athletes in the history of the South Bay.
Did they do Bring It On there, too? Great film, Bring It On.
No, I think that's more of an Orange County vibe, the movie Brick down in San Clemente. But I remember Jason Kendall picked off a ball playing safety, and Tasso was playing fullback, wearing the number 67 as a sophomore.
Yeah.
And I thought he killed, the only other time I thought a guy got killed on the field was when Troy Polamalu hit Lockett, the punt returner, USC versus Kansas State. I was like, he killed him. That guy's dead. And I was down on the field. And I thought my brother killed Jason Kendall. And that was before, they put you on a stretcher and secure your neck. In those days, they just grabbed you on the arm.
How well do you think Jason Kendall remembers that hit?
Probably not too well. They literally dragged his carcass off the field. My older brother was a bit of he's now an artist that lives in the desert, but he knocked out 3 straight defensive ends, kicking out, blocking, the kick-out blocks, off-tackle running plays from the fullback position. And he knocked 3 straight guys out at Maricosta High, which is at Mount Manhattan Beach area. And they turned the sprinklers on to stop the game. They turned the sprinklers on and cleared the field for 20 minutes to figure something out.
Those poor kids from Manhattan Beach probably didn't know what they were signing up for when they were trying to take on the fullback there.
He was, and it's fun to talk about this stuff, and there's way more famous football players, of course, like Curtis Conway that we all watched play. Now, Curtis Conway was a quarterback at Hawthorne High. He ended up as a receiver in the NFL for 10, 12 years, but he ran the option at Hawthorne High School, and he was also the fastest guy in the state.
Yeah.
And he would run the option like Tron. I mean, he would literally take it right to the corner and just turn right up. It was
nobody
amazing.
Could stop it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was before the internet and before tape, and was really widely distributed. And you talked about these guys like they were legends, like they farted thunder and spit fire, and that's why college football, Clay, became famous, because all of those East Coast writers went to Illinois and they wrote about Red Grange.
You couldn't see it on television. You couldn't see it yourself. They had to paint the picture.
Yeah, they wrote these tales of these great conquerors, and really they're just kids. I mean, we're talking about 15-year-old kids right now, but it's that was kind of, it was a time gone by, and I think, we've come to a point where there's so much information out there that we only confuse ourselves. And I kind of miss, it's great that you ran into Alistair, because I kind of miss those days of talking about high school football players in the 90s and late 80s, before everything was already everybody's story.
You could watch everybody's highlight tape on YouTube.
Yeah, on Huddle.
Yeah. I mean, it is true. You can go and watch, and you can compare them, and obviously they have all of the different camps now that are far more significant than they used to be in terms of being able to assess different players. But that in and of itself is pretty wild. Speaking of sort of an incredible physical specimen, DK Metcalf, did you watch his video of him running?
Yeah.
You were talking about how fast some of the guys were in high school. I mean, that's a pretty incredible accomplishment for him to be, 30 or 40 pounds more than a lot of those sprinters and be able to be, at least in some way, respectable with them.
Yeah, well, on a much lower level, that was me in high school running track. I was 50 pounds heavier than everybody, and I was winning hundreds. And you see that a lot with football players in college and the high school level. And more guys are running track, and more guys are being encouraged by recruiting experts and college coaches to run track. Because track, if you're a runner or any kind of athlete, track teaches you to relax while you sprint.
Yep.
And that's a really hard thing to do and learn as a football player, because you're always all tensed up and ready for somebody to hit you, right? But when you get into the open field or these moments that you're not going to get hit, you need to relax your face and bring your shoulders down, and that's how you can separate from people at that level. I always think about Usain Bolt and marvel, and because I just think that that's the pinnacle of sprinting, and we're probably never going to see it again in our lifetimes that good, because just to think of how good he was when he was winning the 100 and 200 by 10 meters. I mean, he's racing against the best
greatest
people
runners in the world. Yes.
Yeah, he ain't racing against me, you, and Danny G.
Yeah.
I mean, and to be that much better than those people is, I don't think, something that most people that are even really hardcore sports fans can understand what his feat of and domination for like a decade. Those feats were in track and field. They were, I mean, from Beijing on, he's the best athlete I think we're ever going to see in our lives. And seeing a big, long guy like DK get a good start, for a big guy and run respectably is it's fun to see. It's always great to watch. But then it makes me think of Usain Bolt. That's just like, damn.
Can you come back, close out 5 more minutes with us?
Oh, come on.
Yeah, Petros Papadakis will be back with us. I want to ask this question, because I do think it's an interesting question, talking about Usain Bolt, DK Metcalf running, all these things. When do we reach the peak of basically how fast man can go? And some people would say, well, steroids and everything else, and Bob Baffert and the Kentucky Derby obviously has continued to raise those questions. But we'll break that down, close out the show next. It is the Tuesday edition of Outkick. Appreciate all of you hanging out with us.